class number 13. In Introduction to Philosophy, and we've been discussing metaphysics and talking about theories of existence. We've been talking about the last discussion, which this group of students did not hear yet. We discussed different distinctions. In metaphysics, we want to make distinctions. Distinctions tell us what things are not. Okay? A, if I say A is or is not B, we want to know what we're talking about here. I gave two types of distinctions last time. We were here, I'll go over them again just because redundancy helps us learn better. One was the real distinction that says that if A has all the same properties, I take that back. I apologize. That's the wrong thing. That's an is of identity. A real distinction says that A can exist without B and B can exist without A. That is, this watch can exist without this hand and this hand can exist without this watch. They're two different things. Nothing weird about that, okay? There is a real distinction there. Okay, they're two different things. A can exist without B and B can exist without A. That's going to become very important when we're talking about who I am or who you are. What are we, right? That is, right? Is of identity. The is of essential predication, if you'll recall the 5 is's, right? And then we had another distinction called a modal distinction, M-O-D-A-L. Modal distinction has to do with, says that A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A. The light bulb can exist without the light, but the light from the light bulb cannot exist without the light bulb. Okay. So one is a dependent, relation, and the other one is not. They're independent. A is independent of B. B is independent of A. That's a real distinction. And B being dependent upon A, that is the modal distinction. And on the test question, when you see it, you'll notice that the conjunction. There are two conjunctions. There's and there's but, right? In this case. And when you see the word and, we're probably going to be talking about a real distinction because we say that A can exist without B and B can exist without A. They can exist independently of each other. On the other hand, with the modal distinction, we're going to be talking about B, B, but. Sorry guys, mine's on something else. A can exist without B, but B cannot exist without A. Now we're going to bring this up in theories of identity as to what we are. Okay, what am I? Now the other day we talked, and I want to make sure you guys understand your assignments. The other day we talked about a little bit about Plato and Phaedo and the 3 arguments for the existence of the soul. And did everybody get the papers kind of graded-ish? So I basically went through those and I looked at them all, looking for 3 things, the 3 arguments. Did you actually read it and mention these arguments? And why do I care about this? Because I want you to know these arguments and I want you to be able to articulate them because we are, as a philosophy department, going to be testing on this on the final. And they're going to want to know how well y'all did on that question, given Phaedo's arguments for the existence of the soul. Okay? So get to know those. I'm going to give you other ideas too, because Socrates is not the last word on discussions of the existence of the soul, if that makes sense to you. All right. So when we ask certain questions like who I am, we want to know, am I a brain? Am I a body? Do I have a brain? There's a whole different statement. Are you a brain or do you have a brain? What are the faculties of the mind? What are the faculties of the mind? Okay. What do I mean by that? Well, what do I mean by that is, what does the mind do? Well, you've got the intellect. I'll write all this down. You've got the will, or otherwise known as volition. So you got the mind, the nous, okay? And if you want to get Greek, make it all total Greek right there. Okay. Faculties. You've got the intellect, thought process of, where we bring in knowledge, right? Our beliefs. We've got the will. Call that volition. Okay? Or desires, maybe. No, that will not be there. That will be, we'll put that here with our appetites. Right? What is our appetites for? We got food, / water, beverage, or whatever, right? Yes, we'll have an appetite for comfort and safety, security. I crave other things. For sex or reproduction, those are appetites. It's an interesting thing. C.S. Lewis points out that, people will go to a striptease and watch somebody, take off their clothes or whatnot, or look at naked stuff. It's ironic that you have that kind of appetite that will be generated with this appetite, but yet we don't do that with food. We don't sit there and go through a cookbook and go, yeah, right on. We eat, obviously, but it's a whole different type of appetite. There's a whole different way appetites affect us. So we have food, comforts. Is there any other appetite that we may have? Maybe for political, that is, for friends, we have an appetite for companionship, maybe. After all, we are political by nature. Political just means we hang out in the polis. What is the polis? The polis is the city, right? Like Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Metropolis, etc. And so, anyway, here's some of the faculties of the mind: the intellect, the will, emotions. Let's get some emotion action in there. Each one of these has its own function. So let's talk about sadness, joy. You'll notice I'm not using the word happiness. Happiness is not an emotion, according to Aristotle, that is. Are you happy? I don't know. Am I joyful? That's another story, like you're laughing and having a great time partying. Very joyful, But can you be sad, like somebody died, and still be a happy person? According to Aristotle, sure. But if you think happiness is an emotion and you're feeling sad, then you can say, I'm not a happy person. That happiness is something that comes and goes. according to Aristotle, happiness is not something that comes and goes. Okay? Anger. Can anybody name another emotion? Maybe jealousy. Let's go with jealousy. Ooh, that's a good one. I don't know if that's really, maybe it is. I took a whole class on philosophy of emotions where you ask, what are emotions? Just, what are they? You know, Robert C. Roberts, my professor, pretty famous guy on the topic, says they are concern-based construals. And I wrote some pretty good papers. I think I disagreed with him on some issues, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. Good that you understand them enough to disagree with them, but you run the risk of, wrecking your grade. So, yeah. But nonetheless, after it's all said and done, you go talk to him as colleagues, because we're now both PhDs, we both published, and I say, hey, Bob, and he says, hey. Anyway, so does anybody else have any other emotion? Sadness.
Fear.
Fear! Oh gosh, I was afraid you were going to say that. Fear. Fear. Yeah, especially once I say concerns-based construal, you go, I'm concerned about that. Right? I got this, little thing on my arm, and it's kind of hairy now, and I better go. I gotta check that out. I don't. I'm just making that up. Sure. Fear, you're afraid. My kids are so afraid of the dark. Right? Boys were you afraid of the dark when you were a little girl? No. No, of course not. Were you afraid of the dark? You were.
I was.
Heck yeah, you were. You're a guy. How about you? Were you afraid of the dark? You were? I think guys are more likely to be afraid of the dark than girls are. You know why? First of all, we think of things like monsters, and we think of things like, the things my sons watch.
Like Gollum Schmeagol from The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Schmeagol. Yeah. My precious. And he's like, I want that thing coming at me, and you got that shadow there that you're just convinced Schmeagol's hanging out there, gonna come over and get it, whatever, right? And my parents, man, they turned that light off, and it was pretty dark. I remember spending the night at my buddy Shane's house. I was like, you call this dark?
All I know is my blanket protected me from all of it.
So. Oh yeah, not me. I just stood there. I stared motionless at this, looking at this thing, afraid to close my eyes until I couldn't fight it anymore last night. That's a kid. So those are emotions, okay? Is there any other emotion that we should know about?
Is anxiety the same as fear?
I'm going to put that there because there may be a difference, okay? And if it is, it may be a type of fear, okay? I get butterflies a lot. Fear usually has a subject, afraid of something. Would you agree? I'm afraid of monsters. I'm afraid of what the boogeyman. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of a lot of things. I'm afraid of losing my kids. I'm afraid of my kids losing me, my wife, and all that. I'm afraid of things.
I'm afraid of God.
Yeah, you fear God. It's the beginning of knowledge, right? It's the beginning of wisdom. It says that sounds translated. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Some translate it as knowledge. We've got sadness. We've got joy. We've got anger. We've got jealousy, fear. We've got anxiety. Anxiety. I have a physical anxiety that I deal with. Okay, where I walk around, I'm like this all the time, and my face looks like this. Like, what's up? And I'm like, I feel like I got the butterflies all the time. Okay, and so it helps me to go. If I am moving, acting, running, I'll do one of two things: either lay down, try to relax, or I am action. And so, is it an emotion? It's certainly a sensation. People go, what's wrong? What are you worried about? I'm like, nothing, or everything. I don't know, right? Because people have what's called generalized anxiety disorder. That's a physiological issue, not necessarily emotional, though, is it? So there are, there are faculties of the mind, and each one of these have a duty. The emotions do something for us. They are important. Could you live life appropriately if you had no emotions?
How about sympathy and empathy? Let's throw those two in there. These may be, I don't know if these would be an emotion or the ability to feel emotions for others. Psychopaths and sociopaths have no empathy. They have no ability to feel the pain of others. Like, I read the news and I see a child hurt, and I'm like, oh my God. I got to a point where I was reading this book, Gulag, about the Russian Gulag system, where they put 25% of their population in these political prisoner camps, and they're work camps, and then they had these children. They had a whole chapter on the children and the babies, because some of the women were put in these camps while they were pregnant, and some of them were raped and had babies, and now they take the kids and they put them in a, and I couldn't finish it. I couldn't even finish it. It was horrible. They said the babies, you'd go to this place where the babies were, and they'd be quiet, completely quiet. The babies didn't cry because they were so uncared for that the babies learned early on that crying got them nothing. And once I got there, I was like, I can't read it. I can't take it anymore. The torture of children. The sociopath doesn't care about that. In fact, that's sociopathy or psychopathy. They're similar in difference. Sociopaths and psychopaths are similar in that they don't feel empathy for others. But psychopathy is said that it is, you are born with it, that it's biological, genetic. And sociopathy, it is social, that it was created by perhaps the way you were raised. So a lot of people who were abused as children have associative, a disorder where it's an associative attachment disorder, where they can't attach to people. Okay, and so they're a bunch of just sociopaths now because they use people because it's all they know. And so they've got part of their mental faculty, this idea of feeling others' emotions or feeling the pain of others, the emotional pain of others, keeps them from treating others appropriately and results in them hurting other people and not caring about it. Okay, so if you meet somebody, a kid or somebody who cannot feel the emotions of animals, like a little kid that goes out and hurts animals like cats and stuff just for fun, you might say that kid might not be able to feel the emotion of others and might be able to hurt others in the future and not care. The prison systems are filled with these people. Okay, and there are a lot. There's a movie. Whenever I teach the class on ethics, I show a movie on sociopathy or psychopathy. I'm sorry, and they say about 1% to 2% of the people in the world have this. Now it's not all or nothing. Okay, it's kind of a scale, 1 to 10, but there's a scale that's actually to 40. I think if you score 40 or higher or something like that, you score that high, you're probably in jail. But that there are sociopaths or psychopaths all around us, and they're not just violent. Not all of them are violent killers, but they will they do hurt others. They might,
They like manipulate you.
They may be highly narcissistic, okay? Not all narcissists are psychopaths or sociopaths, but all sociopaths and psychopaths are narcissistic, okay? That's at least what who knows what narcissism is? Y'all do? Narcissism, it comes from, I know this is a slight tangent, but it's a good one. So Narcissus, in Greek mythology, was a guy, a very handsome young man apparently, and one of the nymphs, the daughters of one of the gods, was in love with him, and he rejected her love, and so the god had cursed Narcissus, and kind of cast a spell on him in a sense where the first thing he looked at, he would fall in love with. Well, what ended up happening is he looked at an image of himself. The key is that he looked at an image of himself in a pool of water, and he fell in love with his own image. Okay, so narcissists are known, when we see somebody who's narcissistic, they're usually all about themselves and how their image is. It's all about how they appear. And they can all, you remember I said there are two types of people, those who always have to be right and those who always have to be right? Right? The first kind is the good kind of person who always has to be right, you know, where if you're wrong, you change so that you can be right. That's a good thing. But then there's the other kind of right where they always have to be right and they're never going to admit they're wrong because they don't want to look bad in front of anybody or anything. So they're always, and so that's kind of the narcissist. They don't want anybody screwing with their image. All right. This is all about their image. It's holding up the facade of their own perfection, and they tend to use people, and they tend to use them for their own aggrandizement. I shall say. But that's narcissism, and narcissism is actually a weakness. I mean, because if somebody's a narcissist, they usually it's indicative that they've got underneath the image a low self-esteem and don't have a high image of themselves, and so they're always trying to perfect the image. Okay, so if that's you, well, you probably wouldn't hear what I say and take it to heart. You'd probably be like, yeah, those guys are that way if they were only perfect like me. Because the narcissist a real narcissist really doesn't hear this kind of advice too well, and sociopaths and psychopaths just don't care. They're like, well, whatever. I'm going to use you anyway, and because they can't feel, they can't emote. But the emotions are very important to our faculties, and so sympathy and empathy are one. We look. I wouldn't take care of my kids if I didn't feel their pain. They start crying, man, and especially my little girl. They'll wrap you around your little finger, right? And that helps, right? I mean, your kid's crying. You don't want your kid hurt, do you? So you kiss the boo-boo and you act weird, really weird as an adult, even though you normally wouldn't act weird. So anyway, emotion. If you're sad, it is indicative that you have lost something. It would be odd that if your parents died and you didn't feel sad at all. No sense of loss. Your brother, your sister, your best friend. So sadness serves a purpose to indicate loss. Anger. What does anger help us do? It helps us act. What injustices would be rectified if there was no such thing as anger? If I see something wrong, I am more likely to act if it stirs up something in me emotionally. If I have no anger over it at all, I have no fuel to the fire. Now, we of course want to make sure all of our emotions are in check. Do we govern our lives by our emotions, or do we let our emotions inform us and then we govern them? What is the faculty that should rule the rest of them? Because I have an appetite. We all have appetites for food, for companionship, for security, and for sex. But what happens when your appetite controls you?
Starts to ignore emotions, will, intellect.
Right, for sure. I mean, come on, think about. Okay, so the last interview with Ted Bundy, he was saying about how his appetite for sex, and he fed himself pornography every day, and it got harder and harder, worse and worse, to the point where his fantasies were so bad and he was ruled by his appetite. And you throw on top of that his sociopathic or psychopathic status, we'll call it, and he goes out and he kills at least 26 young women for nothing more than to fulfill his sexual appetite. Okay? He was being ruled by his appetite. Now, if you asked him, intellectually speaking, is this a moral thing to do? He says, I knew it was wrong. He morally knew good and evil. Intellectually, that is. But he allowed his appetites to govern him. Now, if you think about like crack addicts, now, not to equate a crack addict with a sociopath, somebody who gets addicted to a chemical, and all of a sudden their life is living to fulfill that appetite that they have, that strong urge on a daily basis. And now, are they living as a human or are they living as something else? One of the questions I asked the other day is, what kind of thing are you? So if a boat is a sailing thing, right? It's something made to sail, get on the ocean. A plane is a flying thing. What kind of thing is a human thing? Well, as we read book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, as I think I told you to do, did you start? You brought the book, I saw it. So as you start reading it, it's going to ask you, what kind of thing is this? This is a desk. What kind of thing is it? It's a furniture thing. And what kind of furniture thing? It's a desk thing. And what kinds of things are desks for writing on and placing things on, right? That's what they're for, what they do, what they function as. What is a human? How does it differ than other things? One, it's a living thing. Two, it's a sentient thing. It's self-aware. What's another thing? It's a thinking thing. You are thinking things. Are animals reasoning things? We are rational animals, according to Aristotle. Dogs do not sit there and ask themselves, should I eat this food off the table? No, they ask, am I going to get spanked if I... They have the appetite. Their control of the appetite has to do with their fear of getting spanked, okay, or disciplined. But they don't ask themselves, I wonder how many calories this box of chocolates has before they eat it and die, because they don't know, because they're dogs, right? But humans are thinking things, and that is what we do, and that's what we are in a way. We are also emotional things, correct? But which one should govern which? Are we more like animals if we use our reasoning skills, our intellectual faculties, or if we use our appetites? And you hear people where they're like, oh, I'm so intellectually lazy. They wouldn't even use the word intellectually lazy. They're like, I never read. I hate school. I hate learning. And they love to party and they love to, procreate, or at least do the function of that, right? And you go, well, it sounds like you're just living for your appetites. Like, yeah, what's wrong with that? Well, you're living like an animal would. It's called bestial. You're bestial. You are acting. You're actually lacking control of your appetites. You are living according to them. That's Aristotle again. The real question is, if you want to be happy, and that's what the book Nicomachean Ethics is about, it asks the question, what does it mean to be happy? It has to do with being what you are. Fulfilling your telos, your design. If an eye is for seeing, you see with it. And you function that way. And if your function is as a human, a thinking, reasoning, rational thing, then the more you become that, and the more reasoning you are towards virtue, the more happy you are. And thus you will be, that's why I said earlier, or I asked you, could you be sad and happy at the same time? It's because happiness is not an emotion, but sadness is. Happiness is a state, according to Aristotle. And can you be in the appropriate state? Is it appropriate to cry when you lose somebody? Absolutely. And thus you would be functioning in the way you're supposed to. It would help you recognize the value of that other person or thing that you lost. Anger. It would help. Now, if you're sitting there ruled by your anger so much so that you're driving down the road and some jerk cuts you off, and so you pull them over and you shoot them, you were not operating, right, appropriately. Because it's not moral to do so, even if the other person was in the wrong, right? So the faculties of the mind, if we're going to ask the question, who am I, and what I am, we have to ask, what are these? Are they physical? Remember, in metaphysics, we are asking the questions, are they physical or non-physical? Is there such thing as non-physical reality? Is all reality non-physical? Or is it all physical? Or is it a little bit of both? And when we ask the question from a position of metaphysics of what I am, right? What am I? We want to know, am I a physical thing, a non-physical thing, or am I made up of a couple things? Am I a brain, or am I just a collection of phenomena, and bodies don't really exist? That would be an idealist, right? Or am I a body and something else? Do I have a brain, body and soul? Okay, those would be our options. Now the will, obviously, can you imagine not having any will? Now will is a degreed faculty. Your desire for certain things can be stronger, and less, just not that strong, stronger and weaker. I had a strong desire to get my PhD, which allowed me to keep going for years. I had a strong desire to have this position as a job. So it allowed me to push and apply and to work till I got this extremely high-paying job. And I'm laughing because it's not true.
Super high.
A super high-paying job. It's a great job, though, and I love my job, and I love being able to do what I do. That's why I had a desire, a strong will for it. And I wasn't going to give up. And I didn't. And even sometimes now I still think of myself, sometimes my will's too strong. I worked in the film industry. And one of the guys said that I worked with, he says, Shannon, you just might be too stupid to quit, which is why I want to work with you. Because, those who don't quit tend to get their way, right? I worked there for 13 plus years and on and off. And I tell you what, I still got the bug. I still want to play, work in that industry. I tell you, you get that will to do it, and you start pushing, and everything else gets. Then my intellect says, you know what? Your bills aren't getting paid. Maybe your ego is a little too big, which is driving that will to succeed in this arena that is very difficult to excel in, to succeed in. I mean, so many people try to make it into Hollywood. And the movie, oh my God, I'm still writing music. 50 years old. Who wants to see a 50-year-old rock and roll star, right?
Oh, yeah, everyone.
Who?
I don't know.
No, new bit. I mean, you got to come out with these great songs, and then, but of course, then they see your face, and they're like, yeah, forget it. Not really. I mean,
You have enough makeup.
Well, miracle of modern science could probably shave. I know a good, plastic surgeon or something, but all the same, you're just not as cool.
No, you don't need a plastic surgeon, don't worry.
I don't know, thinking. Just tons of makeup and a big wig. Point being, the will is good, but if my desire, maybe my appetite for success, kind of held me back. I mean, there are a lot of people I go, some of you guys are gonna, what's your degree gonna be in? Nursing? Right, excellent. Get a bachelor's degree in that, go out, be making $100,000 within a few years, right? And job security, meaningful, right? What a great choice. What do you want to do, Shannon? I want to be a rock star. Who's more likely gonna get what they want? That is right. Let's come up and be honest with you. I want to be an actor or a rock star or a professor. I have chosen some very difficult fields. I mean, it is so hard to get hired, by the way, to become a full-time professor. If you only knew. I found it easier to get movie parts. It's not saying I ever was going to be famous, but it's very difficult. It is so difficult because there's just so many more people applying for it. So you got to watch your will. Your will's got to be in check. Your will could be a good thing. Your will to survive, your will to win, your will to succeed. Look, I'm running a marathon coming up, and I've got a will to beat my last score. I'm not going to win the race, I know, but maybe I could beat my last time. Great movie to watch having to do with willpower is, I think it's Matthew Modine, and it's a wrestling movie. Do you remember it?
No.
Do you know why? This is from like 1985, and the idea is he wants to beat this guy in a particular weight class, and he's gonna do whatever it takes. And I can't remember the name. It's something like do whatever it takes. Anyway, all right. The intellect. That seems to me to be the one that should govern all of our choices. That is the faculty. It uses the emotions to inform us, but it will judge them. It will judge propositional knowledge. Is it true or is it false? And then ask the question, even if I feel this way, should I act? There's so many people that are so ready to physically fight right now over politics before they even see the facts of what they are fighting over. It is amazing. Would you agree with me that there are people, I mean, we're talking the whole parts of town are burning down, across the nation. And you ask, why are you rioting? Why are you burning this? Oh, they're all this, that, and the other. And you said they're full of emotion, full of will. But that's all great. And you start asking what they believe and why they believe it, and they're like, I don't know, man. I don't know. What should rule? Well, according to Aristotle, I think, and I'd agree that he would say the intellect. That's what governs us. We are rational animals. If we live according to our appetites, if we live according to our volition, if we live according to our emotions, then we're slaves. And we're not acting according to reality. We want to make sure that those submit to our intellect, not that our intellect, that we are carried away by our emotions. Then at the end of the day, we also have to ask the question in metaphysics, what are these things? These are the faculties, mental faculties, right? Faculties of the mind or the soul, whichever one you want to call it. The psyche, from which we get psychology, which is a Greek word for soul. Does that exist? Well, if you are a metaphysical naturalist, you believe what? What do metaphysical naturalists believe? That everything that exists is what?
Physical.
Physical, that's right.
Yes.
And idealists believe that everything that exists is non-physical. And realists believe that everything that exists is, well, there's a little bit of both, physical and non-physical. If you're a naturalist, what do you think the mind is? It's physical. So what physical thing would that be, the mind? The brain, yes. I am identical to my brain. And if I'm identical to my brain and my brain is identical to the atoms that make it up, I am identical to the atoms. That's called reductionism. If A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C. Write that down. So you kind of got this. A is identical to B, and B is identical to C, and then A is identical to C. Right? In logic, when you see an equal sign, it means identical. It doesn't mean equal. 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 5 minus 1 equals 4. But 2 plus 2 is not identical to 5 minus 1. Those are two different equations, especially when you're talking about money. I have $5, I give you 1, I have 4. I have $2, you give me 2 more, I now have 4. Now, 4 is identical to 4, but 2 plus 2 is not identical to 5 minus 1. So identical in logic, may look like equal, but that is not what it is. It means identity, that if A is identical to B and B is identical to A, then A has all the same properties that B has, and B has all the same properties that A has. We've already discussed this the other day, correct? Yes, we did. Now be on the video as it gets loaded up today. Not only will that be loaded up, keep in mind as you guys miss videos because you guys are skipping every other day, right? Every other time you're coming on Thursdays, whereas the other people are coming on Tuesdays. Keep in mind, they're getting stuff like this that you're getting, but it's different. It's all metaphysics, but you need to know it all, right? You guys need, so we're moving towards something. You know, we're talking about the faculties of the mind. They're gonna get here on Tuesday, and I'm gonna start talking about this stuff like they should know it, and they're gonna go, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, it's on the video. You gotta watch the video because all of it's gonna be very testable, okay? And of course, these videos on the quizzes, we'll say, are going to be open. You know, keep in mind, you can be watching them. There's no way for me to stop you, so why should I pretend? Okay? Open resource. Okay, so we want to know, you remember if you talk about our 5 ises, we want to know what the mind is. What is the mind identical to? What is the necessary and sufficient conditions for it, right? What are the accidental properties of the mind, and what are the essential properties of the mind? Remember, an accidental property is something that one could lose and still be the same thing. And essential property is something that is essential to that thing being what it is. For example, a triangle cannot lose its shape without it losing its identity. Okay, that's an essential property of being a triangle, is its shapeness. So when we talk about the mind, what are we talking about? We have options. I just said that you, if one is a metaphysical naturalist, you have to come up with with a physical account of what the mind is. Okay? Now, I can't stress enough the importance of these first foundational questions about reality, about what and who you are, to how this ends up affecting views on morality and how we act, and then views on politics, how we should rule ourselves. I was just asking the class last period, we'll call it, you know, about laws and lawmaking and what laws should be made. Should there be laws against pornography? Should there be laws against drugs? Should there be laws against pornography, drugs? Give me something else. Prostitution, right? Should there be laws against religion? Should we regulate the preaching of religion so that the person who wants to go out and take a bunch of drugs and watch pornography and go have sex with prostitutes, so that religion doesn't get in their way, right? Right? Well, some people believe that, right? And you go, well, on what grounds do you make these laws? I mean, these rules. You say, well, they're moral, right? And you say, well, maybe we shouldn't make any laws concerning morality. Well, can you? Imagine speed limits. You know, why do we make speed limits? Well, because we want people to die. Oh, so we recognize the value of human life. That's a moral statement. It's a value statement, right? It's hard to take the moral component out of lawmaking. So we want to know, how do our first philosophical beliefs and stances, how does that affect later on, kind of that butterfly effect? How does that affect the rest of what we believe? And it should be consistent. Look, if you believe that everything is physical, that everything that exists is physical, you're gonna have a hard time convincing me that some kind of objective morality exists, okay? That, you know, oh, it's always wrong to do certain things. Well, what do you mean by wrong? Because according to you, things that exist only exist if they're physical. Wrongness must be physical. Can you hand me some wrongness? The answer is no, right? So people, it's ironic how moralistic some naturalists can be. Does everybody have all this? Okay. So I'm going to be throwing a lot of stuff at you, metaphysical concepts as we go along, talking about the mind. We talked about the faculties of the mind, but let's talk about the identity of the mind, the essence of the mind, the nature of the mind. Remember, in psychology, they use the word psyche, psychology, but they translate it as the study of the mind. They don't translate it as the study of the soul. I suspect the reason they do that is because the mind sounds less religious than the study of the soul. Okay? That's my suspicion. Whoever they are, of course, right? We're going to ask, I'm going to put this little phi there, or if you're in Texas, you pronounce that Greek letter as phi, right? It's just short for philosophy, and we're going to talk about philosophy of mind. If you ever see the philosophy of something, the philosophy of science, we'll talk a little bit about here too, the philosophy of religion, political philosophy, philosophy of mind in this case, the first question that will always be asked, just like in this class, Introduction to Philosophy, is what is it? What is science? What is, let's say if it was philosophy of art, what is art? What is religion? What is philosophy? In this class we asked, the love of wisdom. And what is, in our case right here, what is the mind? We talked about the faculties of the mind. So we got to give, we want to ask the nature, the substance of what the mind is. Okay? And you could have two major views. Okay, you could have the monist view. Monism. What does that sound like? The mind is made up of how many substances? One substance. On the other hand, you could have dualism, and that's 10 substances, right? No, it's 2. And so, the mind can be 1 or 2, or that's about what we got here. And if we're talking monism, then the mind is either A, physical, or B, non-physical. Okay? We're going to break all that down. Okay, so we got the mind. It is either all physical, or it is all non-physical. Let's call this idealism. We're not going to deal with idealism, not because I don't think it's a good idea, not because I don't think it's worthy, but it's just not the major debate. So now if somebody wanted to come up and say, yes, it is, I'd say, great, let's hear some literature on it, and we could work with that. I'm sure Berkeley would be fine. Berkeley, the idealist, was the guy they named a particular university after in California, but they mispronounce his name, as does everybody else, and they call it what?
Berkeley.
Berkeley. Yeah, he's a philosopher. Anyway, in physical monism, we have a couple views. We have reductive views. So we have reductive physical monism in philosophy of mind. We have non-reductive. This is a Porphyrian tree from the philosopher Porphyry. Okay? You notice how I break it down. If you took your notes, the way I give you your notes, you may notice that you could do this with all of the lectures I do. And if you saw my notes that I wrote years ago that I've memorized and just delivered to you, and I have it in my truck sitting there waiting for me to pull out one day and go, I should probably look at these. You would look at those and you go, that's what it looks like. And you could literally take all of your notes and do that with themselves. So like when I talk about philosophy, you know, I break it into epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, right? I take, you know, epistemology and I talk about, you know, justified true belief. I talk about justification, I give different trees. And I talk about truth, the theories, you know, the pragmatic, the coherence, and the correspondence theory. And I talk about belief, and of course, I only gave you one thing, belief, but you see how I do that. And so it's a great way if you do this with my notes, with my lectures, but you can also, it helps you categorize from the generic to the species, right? See where things belong. Emotions belong, let's say sadness belongs in the category of emotions, which belongs in the category of faculties of the mind, and the mind belongs in a faculty of certain sentient beings, okay? And sentient beings are things that exist that are physical and perhaps not physical too. So anyway, so we're talking about the mind, and here we break that down. So when you go back over your notes and stuff, you might want to try to see if you can put all that together like this. And it might help you memorize, you know, this stuff, and it helps you think better in the future, how to put things in their little boxes. Okay? So we have reductive and non-reductive. What do we mean by reductive? Well, if I say A is identical to B, call the A the mind, then it must be identical to B, that thing. And if the mind is a physical thing, then the mind must be this physical thing. Whatever this physical thing is must be the mind, and it must reduce to it. If A is identical to B, and B is identical to C, then A is identical to C, right? Our bodies are made up of cells, and our cells are made up of atoms, right? So cells must be identical to the atoms that make them up. It reduces. Does that make sense? And if you are a reductive physicalist, monist, philosopher of mind, you believe that there is something physical that reduces, you believe that there is mental, what we will call mental events, that are identical to brain events or physical events. So whatever physical event it is identical to the brain event, or mental event, not the brain event. It could be a brain event, but there are different theories of reductive, physicalistic, monistic philosophy of mind. Okay? Let me start with the first one. Start with behaviorism. And I'll give you two types of behaviorism. One is methodological. See my Porphyrian tree working out here? And the other is philosophical. All right. I often tell my students to take a picture of this. However, we're taking a picture of it via the camera, so
Can you move that stand out of the way?
I don't know if I can. Let's see.
Or like lower it maybe?
Let's move it, yeah. You can do some curls with it too. It's a little dumbbell. All right. There's a water bottle and all that in the way?
No, that's all good.
All good, all good?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Is this as far as the tree goes?
No. No,
You're not done yet.
yeah, I mean, that's one type of reductive physicalistic monist. I've got like 2 or 3 others. I've got non-reductive, and then we're going to go over to dualism, and there's going to be 2 types of dualism, and then I'm going to, you know, put out some branches there. So it's pretty impressive.
I should wait to take a picture until then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going to finish it today, but what I will do is I'll reproduce it every time I talk about it. So every time I do this, you'll see me rewrite it. Go ahead.
This is really young.
Do
Do you have a highlighter?
I have a highlighter? In my office. I apologize, I don't have one on me.
It's okay.
Yeah, there you go. I knew somebody would have it. This is a team effort here. Let's talk a little bit about behaviorism, okay? Behaviorism is both a great tool and a bad philosophy. Okay? There are two types of behaviorism. I gave you methodological and philosophical. Methodological behaviorism says that for every mental event, there is a behavioral event. That for every mental event, there are behavioral events. And they need not be there. Now, this is why I gave you the two distinctions earlier, real and modal distinctions, okay? Because we want to know, are mental events identical to the physical event of behaviors? So imagine you stepping on my foot and I start jumping up and down and shouting, ouch. That is a physical behavior event, right? You stomped on my foot and I jump up and down and shout, ouch. So you say the mental event is identical to the behavior event. The mental event is called pain. The behavior event is called jumping up and down and shouting ouch, or what the heck. Okay? Man. Okay? Pain is identical to the behavior. And you ask the question, is that true? Right? Because that's what we do in philosophy. We want to know truth. Because if we don't have truth, we don't have knowledge. If we don't have knowledge, well, then we can't have wisdom, can we? And we are lovers of wisdom. And we want to know if my mental events are identical to behavioral events. Turns out, you could kick me in the shin, and I could be in great pain, and I could look at you with no response and say something to the effect of, is that all you've got? Now, I've given you a behavioral event. That does not seem very painful to you, does it? While inside, I'm crying like a little kid. Going, oh my God, that hurts so bad. But yet, I'm not showing it. So what's that saying is I could have A, the mental event of pain, without the physical event of B. Right? I have A without B. Make sense? Also, if you recall earlier, I was an actor, right? And I was in a film once where my buddy got shot. Oh, it's crazy. And I start screaming cuss words and going, what the heck, man? I'm acting all scared. And I'm having the physical, behavioral event of fear and panic, but I am not having the mental event of fear and panic. I'm having the mental event of, what's my line? How loud shall I scream? Is this okay? That's my mental event going on. But outside, everybody's like, oh, dude, that's great. Oh, I bought it. Oh, you look so scared. And yeah, but I wasn't. Okay? As a matter of fact, going back to scared, you could act tough and be all brave when in fact inside, you'd be like, man, this guy's going to kill me. But you got to be brave, right? You act all brave, but inside you're scared. Right? You act tough for your family or something. So you could have A without B. That is, you could have the behavioral event without the mental event, and you could have the mental event without the behavioral event. What kind of distinction is that? It's called a real distinction. It means they're two different things. Let me simplify it for you. You could have this cap called the mental event, and you could have this marker called the behavioral event, right? They're two different things. You could have this without this, and you could have this without this, meaning they are not the same thing. Does that make sense to you? Some of you are all looking at me like you're all like, you got it? No. You know these are two different things, right? So that means you could have this without this and this without that, right? That means they're really distinct. It's called a real distinction. Okay? And I could have fear, the mental event of fear, without the acting behavior of fear, or I could have the behavior of fear without actually being afraid. It's kind of one I have this without this and this without this, right? That means they are two different things. And so the philosophical behaviorist, the one who believes that mental events are identical, because that's what we're asking, are they identical? The philosophical behaviorist believes that behaviors and mental events are identical to each other. He is wrong, because we know you could have A without B and B without A, therefore they are really distinct. They are separate. I'm teaching you how to show that they are not identical. So a guy says, yeah, no, mental events are just behavioral events. And they do this with animals, right? He's scared. What does it mean to be scared? It means you're panting and, put your tail between your legs and going under the bed. Okay, that's an indication that you're scared. But it is not fear, okay? Because you get A without B and B without A, right? Now this is where methodological behaviorism is important, because it is true that we associate certain behaviors with certain mental events, because in a great number of times when people were afraid, they had certain behaviors. And so when I see you acting a certain way, I'll go, hey, are you okay? And methodologically, it works out okay. You're crying. Most people cry when they're sad, all right? If you're crying, you're having a behavior event that is associated with what? Sadness. So you okay? And you're like, it's a good tool. It's a good psychological tool. A philosophical tool to say that A is identical to B, though, it is a bad tool. Because you could cry without being sad, and you can be sad without crying. You can see that A can exist without B, and B can exist without A. So philosophical behaviorism fails because there's a real distinction between mental events and behavioral events. Any questions? I don't, questioning myself how far I want to go today on this. Why don't you, I tell you what, why don't we leave it at this today?